you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. Uh, it's a privilege to be part of this distinguished audience. And I should especially begin with my session with a thanks to Professor Hemant Adlaka, who was the person who introduced Chinese language to me. And over the period, of course, I went to China and picked up this language further on. Uh, my topic is basically media systems in China with a special reference to new media publics. Without going into the detail of what exactly the traditional form of media has been, I would like to begin with this notion of news, the way it has been in recent times. In the sense that news has been a casualty in recent times, pretty much. And despite the fact that someone called Daya Thusu, who happens to be a very, very, very celebrated author on media, he says that news is not merely a media product, but a vehicle for engagement in the democratic process. But the fact is that news has been a casualty, and in many more ways. And I kept thinking about it, and I was forced to ask certain questions, that the very way in which news has originated over the past 200 or 300 years, the way it has been, the new media system has been, we have to question the very fundamentals from which news originates in the first place. And what we see is that the existing media systems, not new media systems in which news works in, is basically top to bottom hierarchy, in which you have gatekeepers, and it's essentially the power holders of the society which basically give you news, and you essentially, public tries to be, they want the public to believe in that kind of things. So there has to be questions, and these questions, I believe, do hold certain relevance. Is that, doesn't news represent hierarchy and entertainment democracy? And doesn't news actually matters for those who are with power or without power? And for the rest of them, it's pretty much about entertainment. And this is important also from the point of fact that the biggest Indian newspaper in English, Times of India, it happens to be managed by a very successful businessman called Samir Jain. And this newspaper has been able to overcome all the tides of, markets and competition and new media and everything. And he is credited with what? Dispensing with the post of editor. And there was this stats, I don't know how true it is, but the fact is that less than 5% of people read edit pages, and the news that keeps coming in on the news pages, they have been in consistent decline. I keep telling my journalism students that think of this fact that 100 years ago, the Times of India that we publish today, that is there today, if that Times of India would have been there in 1912 or 1916, there would have been riots. I mean, what about Delhi Times that we see? I mean, the kind of a story that is published, even the news and advertorials that keep coming in. Is that news? I mean, what kind of news are we? So there has been a dramatic transformation of news itself, and newspaper for sure. And news has transformed into what we call infotainment, edutainment, all sorts of things. And wherever we go, whether it be Gandhi's India or Mao's China, the reality is that the entire media system has ended up in hierarchies with them as gatekeepers, with the power people in the gatekeepers. And definitely media needs to think about the way, because this conference, I mean, we have people here mostly from what we call traditional media. We don't have filmmakers, we don't have gamers, we don't have social media enthusiasts, we don't have all forms of new media coming. I keep telling my journalism student that new media is a one stream of teaching which becomes old just the moment you start teaching it. I used to be on Orkut. I used to be on Delicious. I used to be on several other platforms which don't even exist today. I'm not on Snapchat, all my students are there. I'm not even now on many other platforms, which they are pretty much quite fond of. I mean, that's true for every country. So new media is pretty much what we call now media. So it is now, I mean, now it's over and it's over. So whatever we teach in new media, whatever forms of new media are evolving, that's pretty dynamic. And the way things have been over the past 100 years, every next decade, every next 5 years, it has become faster over the years, is that you have new forms of media which is more personalized, which is targeting individuals in a very different way, the way traditional media used to target. And it is completely different than anything we ever thought of. And it's much more broader than we can even imagine. Think of this fact. Today, even shopping is an entertainment. You shop every day. You shop every time. People just shop for fun. This is also a form of new media in a way. And you have new forms, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. People go and play and have fun. And I have seen these things happening. And the consumption of new media, if you see the consumption that's happening of media on an average, people consume on an average 6 to 8 hours of daily, all forms of media. And what is happening is that it's all being consumed, most of the consumption is happening on news media, on new media. And for example, if you see in case of China, you have more than 600 million internet users, most of them on mobile phones. And live in a very, very dynamic ecosystem, which is very, very different from anything we think of. I had Chinese friends. My roommate was a Chinese. Half of my classmates were Chinese, and I had this unique privilege of being able to live and interact with them, travel to their homes at times. And they never used to pick up a newspaper at all. Absolutely not. That's true even for my students. That's possibly, well, I stick to newspaper because I need to. I teach journalism. So I need to, but how many young people are worried about it? And this is one thing that I've experienced in China, that whatever the news media keep writing about, I think essentially, if apart from the top 3 to 4%, 5%, 10% who really have stakes in these differences, under quote, really nobody cares. And this is what I call 3B. The first thing that Chinese people have about India is about Buddhism. You talk to them, they keep thinking about India, about if you poke them, well, maybe they will tell you a couple of things that, well, I went to India and it was quite not that good, it was quite dirty, that is the thing that I often came to hear, and that's kind of thing. It's quite crowded. They would show me that Indian railway photo and they say, do you still travel like that on the top of the railways, things like that. But the thing is that still they have this recall factor of Buddhism. Apart from that, the second thing is whether they know about Delhi or not, they do know about Panchalore, that's Bangalore. So technology is pretty much there. So they do recognize. And for that matter, you just think of the fact, Pakistan is such a great friend of China, higher than mountains, deeper than oceans. How many Chinese people go to Pakistan for tourism? They don't. They definitely don't. And I was in Chachiang University where there were more Pakistani students than Indian students. And Indian students were seen differently because they have this thing that Indians are good in technology, this kind of thing is there. And there is a third factor, which is pretty much important. I think I'll bring that factor after discussing all these things, is that the third factor, one single movie called Three Idiots. That one single movie has done more for India than possibly all of traditional media has done in 60 years. There is a recall factor for Bollywood. So this is the third B. So my thing is that what are we talking about? Where is the negative coverage that we are worried about? In the sense that you go to Chinese museums, you have Japan. If you compare the China-Japan relations, Japan is everywhere. I watched Chinese television serials. There is one serial, very interesting one called Machue, which means basically sparrow. And it's a serial which is in Japanese. I have around a dozen serials that I have watched. There were 2 from Japan. There are so many Japanese characters that keep coming. They're mostly portrayed negatively. And despite that, Chinese people are pretty fond of Japanese themselves as well. I had a Japanese classmates, and they think that they do have technological edge on those things. But then, I think in Japan's case, we can say the same thing that we have in case of Pakistan in India. But in India, with regards to India and China, there is hardly anything negative in the popular psychology. The popular press, the popular young people, they absolutely don't know about 1962 at all. And they definitely don't care about what is being written by these editorials and presses and everything. They come to India, they visit it, they meet people, they get an impression, and they think good or bad based upon that. So I think people-to-people interaction is the most important thing. So my conclusion about this thing is that new media is a pretty dynamic field, and 3 shifts are fundamental that's happening in the recent times. First, that entertainment is going to be the prime media genre in coming times. News itself has become entertainment. And Indian media is a good example for that, beginning from mimicry to be the best. Something the Chinese cannot imagine of somebody mimicking President Xi Jinping on a Chinese television serial. The second thing, advertising and monetization is happening in a big way, and traditional media has no clue how to deal with it. Masses are willing to pay, but for only real gain. And that gain is some criteria which is not determined by the traditional gatekeeping system. And the third thing is that there is a subtle shift from the context of political economy defining social and cultural to one where socio-cultural economy is defining the politics. I think these three are very, very fundamental shifts and that's happening. And what we call new media today is pretty big. Everything non-traditional, you name it, and everything that's going to come, that's all non-traditional. And the good thing, well, at times you may have arguments that it's not that good, but the thing is that the people who are in the new media, and that's emerging, you have IMAX, you have Dolby, you have 3D, you have cinemas, you have art installations, all these forms are in some way or the other way new media or the new media to come, which can be something very different. We might not have any idea. Even an interactive gear that you wear at times can be a new media, by the way. So they're all seeking a non-conventional agenda. They're not seeking the conventional agenda that have been defining the relationships. So where we stand by this way. So you see a chart here in which says that you have publishing. In 2015, it was nearly 12.4 billion. 2019, it will be 13.1. Video games. It will be almost up to the publishing industry in the next 4 years. And you see film entertainment, music, the growth is pretty much fast. And you all know the newspaper has been in pretty decline. In India, we are growing, but that's a story that's not going to remain for long. 10 to 15, 20 years, it's going to vanish away. So the same trend is repeating in Indian media as well. And I just tried to Google through and what we call shopping entertainment. And I should possibly call it shoptainment. You see Singles Day thing on Alibaba. You search it on Python, you search it on Google, you search it on Chinese, you search it on English. It's all flooded with the stories. That's there. Billions of dollars of sales in minutes. So that's pretty much there. And it's not going to change. Consumer e-commerce, and I did a story for India Rights a couple of years back. And at that point in time, the fact was that Alibaba alone sells more than the entire US e-commerce industry added together. So that's pretty big. And this is something which is also reflected in the consumer dynamics of Chinese media. You have the consumption for recreational thing, and this kind of thing is pretty much increasing, and it's becoming big, very, very big actually. So where are we heading? I actually searched through Miss Annie Chan's website, Loop Scoop. It was interesting. I found a couple of articles. And her website is, in the sense that it's hardly nothing political at all. And I found these two articles, which was pretty interesting, written by some Tripti Nagdel. And it's an interesting article. And these are the articles people are reading pretty much. Female bodyguard, a new trend in China. Even I read it word by word, and it was interesting to read through it. And there is this mental blog about what is being written in newspaper about political issues. You know what's being written, so why do you read? You know what's being written about political issues, so you want to know something different, and this is where these kind of things comes. Mobile commerce is another big thing, and then you have other charts which will keep saying you that online is the future. You have young people, online, dynamic consumers, and they're going to, the consumption, if you see the news media, the traditional media is inching away, the new media is coming up, and the new media, mobile is coming up, and among the mobile users, you have young users coming up in a big way. So graph after graph, stats after stats, you see this. Online hours, out of the most time that they use, it's all being spent on online. And it's all there. If you think of this fact, you use media for 8 hours in a day, 6 hours of that you use on online media, most likely on entertainment and related stuff. What will determine ultimately what you think about another country? And I think these are the regions, and these are the centers where we need to focus about. There are many things about these things which can be said. So same thing, graph after graph being repeated. But I'll take you now towards the end of this thing about these three companies. These happen to be Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, which basically WeChat is there. And if you see the users that these websites have is much more bigger than any newspaper that's being sold, anybody that is reading. And they happen to be in top 19, top 30 technology giants of the world. And now I bring you to something called this thing. Now, this is India-China joint movie project around which 3 movies were planned in. And this is the movie Kung Fu Yoga. Before that, Xuanzang one made. And Xuanzang was nominated for an award as well. But this movie, you see, it was a flop in India. It hardly did business in India. But in China, it did quite business, 1,200 crores. And how many Salman Khan movies do that much business? So he should be jealous. he should be thinking of working with Chinese producers. And by the way, Amir Khan is a household name in China. PK, I saw people in train, television watching PK songs. One Chinese was singing Ashiki 2 songs, and I was surprised, is he a Chinese? And I went close him and asked him, and, do you know Hindi? And he knew not a word of the Hindi, but he could sing that song pretty well. And that was the impression that we have. So I think we should not be, my conclusion is that if I see that the generation is changing, things are evolving, I don't have, I think that there's no need to be worried about what's being written in the traditional media. Let them what they want to write. And I think the Chinese should also just ignore it. And we should also just ignore Global Times and God of Tyagi, of course, because I think that's one name which has been reverberating. And you can see one more related thing is that about this Sean Sang movie is that China's foreign film entry for Oscars was this movie. Can you even imagine China nominating a movie which has Japanese characters in the Oscars? I mean, we haven't done that for the Chinese movie. For that matter, we don't have many joint movies. So what we see is that there is no bad feelings as such. I don't see it. I have been in China for 2 years, traveled to nearly 30 cities, lived in many places. I never found anything as such. Of course, there are certain good people and bad people. There might be people, Chinese people never really think that they are wrong. They're always right. And that's true. That's one thing I realize. But overall, as far as India is concerned, they do have positive feelings, and I don't think they need to be worried about. So we need to focus upon what I call games and other things and whatever you call it. You just do it, and you will be there. And this is another thing which you can see the Chinese internet is coming up, so possibly we need to learn Chinese. As Hemant sir said, one interesting thing, you have platforms for everything. But I think I will end up with these 2 lines. And there was this one thing that one of my teachers used to say, is that if you have to shorten one line, you don't try to just rub it. Just try draw a long line in front of that. That line will become shorter itself. So let's not focus upon traditional media. Just focus upon Bollywood, focus upon other segments of media, new media which is becoming big and bigger, and the audience is becoming bigger and bigger, and the traditional media will learn. Thank you.
Very much for that positive note. I will no longer worry. I will be happy. But that was really interesting. My one question to this would be, would all these, alternative media, social media users, are they going to be the decision makers of the future, or are the decisions going to be made by someone else? And I think that's something that I see hanging in the air, but I think that's a very positive note to see that amongst the younger people, those 423 million users of social media between 18 and 25, hard feelings are not what's getting projected in their usage. And I think that's, so we'll talk more about all this later. Now, let's see, our last speaker before open discussion is Wenjuan Zheng, and she is a professor at Jindal Global University. She's the assistant dean for international collaboration, so certainly her place is well merited here. And also she has a law degree. Her subject for discussion is going to be promoting people-to-people contact in India and China. The role of academia. What role can academia play in promoting this kind of contact? Are you going to go up?
Okay, so it's big pressure to be the last speaker. I think we should actually stop with Professor Jess. He already predict the future, but now I still have to step back to the traditional kind of, so I want to explain why I want to stand here, because I want to show respect and also my appreciation to all the great participants for the whole day. Thank you for providing such a kind of insightful perspectives and knowledge to us. So I want to talk about, so we talk about actually not focus on media, but focus on communication between India and China, right? The communication. So media, of course, play a very important role, and we have lots of reflections about mindset, kind of the lots of barriers in the mind from the morning or the afternoon. But actually, it's not just about mind. Sometimes there's also knowledge gap. So the knowledge actually, this is what the academia should think about. I can give you some small examples, like, you know, in February, last February, there's a drought agitation. So if you read the Chinese media, of course, it's more in-depth than before, but they still focus on, like, caste discrimination or how serious this kind of agitation. But there are very, very few media want to explore the perspective actually which India explore. That is about reservation, right? The drought agitation not about not directly, you know, about caste discrimination. Actually, it's about how the Indian Constitution responded to caste discrimination, how the reservation functions, you know, the reservation system. But this, I don't think the media have this knowledge. Actually, if you review the Chinese literature, even there are no scholar research on this. So that means there's a big kind of knowledge gap. So the miscommunication, not just about mindset, but also about knowledge deficit. I think also here in Indian media, it's very, so far I have not found any report about Chinese civil society development. I think mainly focus on like Western, like whole suppression of human rights, but that's very, very little knowledge about how civil society have developed. If you have a market economy, you cannot imagine there's no civil society. That's not possible. There are lots of development, but you cannot find. This is also because the very few Indian scholars maybe also research on that, cannot provide this information to the media. So I just want to see the academic can play a very important role in terms of to provide this kind of intellectual support to media. So it's not just about mindset, it's also about the knowledge gap. And then I want to have another point about the role of social media. So of course, for social media, there's provided diversity, but they're also concerned about kind of quality, right? Quality about the information. Actually, this also raises a question for the academia. So usually academia focus on some research, spend a lot of time, but just on the bookshelf. So it cannot be communicated with the public. So the knowledge cannot be easily communicated. So there's some, like we have some, distinguished Chinese studies scholars here, like Professor Heyman. So, but I think maybe the knowledge how to communicate with the public. So before we rely on the traditional media, but we needed to rely on their filtering. Yeah, they have their kind of perspectives. So I think the academia or the Center for Indian and Chinese Studies, we try to have our own WeChat, account or something. We want to develop our own social media and try to convey our research in a very kind of accessible way to the public, to let the Chinese public understand, what's the research will be in a rigorous way, but the communication will be in a simple way to let the public get accessible. So I also kind of share the same point with Professor Heyman. He mentioned, so between the scholars' communication, I think two barriers. So first, of course, for Indian scholar research on China, it's language. So if you cannot speak Chinese, I think there's still very few Indian scholars who can use the original Chinese language resources to conduct the research. So if you cannot speak the Chinese, you cannot use the Chinese original resources to do research. Usually, you cannot feel the beat of the Chinese, development. So usually it's very kind of like a third perspective, not very contextualized. And from the Chinese perspective, I think many scholars lack of the strong incentive to go to India, to be based here for some time, to have the contextualized understanding. Because India is such a diversified country, right? You cannot use the very kind of second source information to really understand India. So I think the remote research cannot also get the beat of India. So far, I think these two barriers actually in the scholarship also provide, create some problem for the, providing sound knowledge for the media and also for the public. But glad to see we have more and more Chinese scholars. Now we have one Professor Sui, now based in the ICS. And we also have some at the JNU, and we also have Professor Jiang based over the GGU, Jindal Global University. We have more and more who would like to stay here to really, in a discovery, to discover Indian, not ideological or judgment-based. I think that's very important because this is, for scholars, they should not use the seasonal, right, like media. They should more kind of in-depth and also more neutral, more rigorous to understand and provide more sound knowledge. So I just stop here, and then we can open the floor for the discussion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Wenjuan, bringing this into the realm of academia and the value of this kind of, scholarly exchange, but also penetrating a culture. Again, we're talking about penetrating a culture and a language to be able to understand what's really going on. So as you suggested, we will open up to the public now. You can either make a comment or address your questions to the entire panel or to specific people on the panel. Please.
Was 2014. Xi Jinping was visiting India, and we came across a news saying that Doordarshan sacked its newsreader for misreading Xi Jinping's name. Okay, he read it as 11th Xi Jinping. So 11 Jinping, so this is our depth of our knowledge about China. Let's start from here. In the morning I came, I was thinking that Chin India is within inverted comma. And last session, Suruchi removed that comma. And this session, I came to know that better Chindia. So I think there is a need to question all these. Already, Mr. Ramachandran in the morning said that let's say de-demonizing China. I think there is a need to demystifying China, and at the same time, I agree with Sukumar that, see, when you are talking about the dragon, elephant, and they are dancing tango, I don't know why they will. And this fictitious thing, dragon, makes no sense. All these things actually making us less ignorant about China. And this is a kind of mystification. So there is a need to demystify. And so from the morning, it seems that most of the media persons who were journalists, correspondents for a long time, they are trying to self-criticizing. This is a process as possibly. So this self-criticizing, and I don't know whether the self-criticism will lead us anywhere. Who will make journalists responsible? And And the morning, Suhasini was talking about responsibility. So this responsibility mean that self-censorship, self-restraint? What is that? So thank you. Anybody can answer my question.
Okay, who would like to make a response?
Yeah, I can give it a shot. Follow up. Yeah, I think Xi Jinping, of course, this complete collapse of that professionalism, the whole recruitment process you have to question. But I'm not sure that he or she was sacked, because sacking a person for even a gross error like that is not very easy. She may have been taken off the duty, and it may have been reported as being sacked. I'm not sure what exactly happened, because it's a government undertaking, and it's not like, unless she was a part-time reader and so on and so forth. The demystification, of course, look at the content analysis. It's very important that I hope that we can get a research project going on this, because coverage of China tends to be, firstly, framed in the adversarial kind of mode, and secondly, focused very narrowly on the contentious issues like the border, river waters, and the competition for third country markets. Like, when China makes an outreach towards Africa, it's considered as a threat in India, and India does its own kind of imitative, mimicking kind of operation in China. So, I don't see that this is necessarily the way to look at it, because these are multidimensional countries with long histories and civilizations and very rich cultures. What do you see by way of coverage of Chinese culture or sports, or or any of those other aspects of what would be called the soft power projection of China? You don't see very much of that. So in that context, and I'm also not very equally optimistic and sanguine about what was said in the morning's panel discussion, that ownership structures have no influence upon this. What Shastri said has a bearing, and in fact recently we saw a very vivid illustration of how the kind of overlapping of interests between arms and defense contractors and the media can create an active situation of censorship. If you look at The Wire, 2 articles were ordered removed because a person coming into the media space also has interests in defense contracts, and he also happens to be a member of parliament and a member of the defense acquisition committee of parliament. So, multiple conflicts of interest there. and 2 articles that pointed out that this is something that you got to watch out for got removed by court injunction. So, there is a threat to freedom of the press itself, the public right to know, from this kind of an overlapping of interests. So we need to do that. And how do we challenge it? I am suggesting that the social media is a very important resource which we can use, but subject to those points which I mentioned, because if you leave it to dispersed kind of, that is in a way a very positive thing, that user-generated content is the richness of social media. But the problem there is that the trash tends to float to the surface. The authentic information gets buried. So is there a way of correcting that? No, I think if you have a concerted effort to use the resources to bring up that, what is authentic, carefully curated and carefully researched information, then the mainstream media will be pressured. Now, even Google, which leaves everything to the user, invariably brings up the Wikipedia page at the top of your search. If you give a search string, good chance that you'll get the Wikipedia page at the top of the string. Then you might get a lot of pretty useless stuff. So Wikipedia has managed to create that constituency through this process of carefully curated content, but rigorously curated, but
long history in our historical experiences. Post-independence India particularly is baffling, and the present dominant discourse about India-China relationship and the dynamics which has created it, I think we need to do a serious introspection. In our cultural memory, in our traditions, we've just lost China. We refer to fairy tales, British fairy tales, European fairy tales, we refer to American stories, and the Chinese stories, the Southeast Asian stories, children's stories have gone missing from our collective memories. And they are very fascinating ones. We don't teach Chinese as a language to our school children. I'm sure there are very few, hardly any schools which offer Chinese as a language to the growing students. It's European languages, it's German, Spanish, and whole lot of other languages, but Chinese, Japanese, and other languages are missing. I think it's a very, very serious missing link. We need to pick up from there the folk tales, the stories, and rest what you talked, what Tilak talked. I think if we start from this, rest we can cover in strides. But this is what we have missed, and this is what we need to build. And there isn't much time. We need to coexist. We need to come on the same page very quickly. Otherwise, I think we are in for facing serious problems. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, that comment, that thoughtful comment. Okay, is there anyone else? Yes.
Ask, thank you so much for all the esteemed panel, and everybody spoke very eloquently and very useful information that we were able to receive from all of you. My question is generally to the panel, as well as to the point that Hemant Adlakha brought up. I'll ask you just a quick question. What do the Chinese call the 1962 thing? You kind of left that hanging there, and I was curious since then. But I want to append that as well with the comment that Kathleen was making about the importance of language, in the sense that how we frame something in terms of like what a people calls a certain phenomenon, or how a people understand a certain phenomenon in a perspective matters. So in other words, I think it matters to me as someone who's curious about China, not having as much knowledge as I would like to have about it, to see how China would frame in their language and their perspective, the way they look at India, and what do they call the 1962 war in China.
Okay, thank you for your question, and quick answer to your quick question about what is in Chinese for the 1962, whatever it happened. Chinese call it China's defensive war against India.
Okay.
That is the official way they term it. And if you want to know it in Chinese, I can say that also. If you want to hear that in Chinese, I can say that also. You would like to hear that?
Yes, we'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Okay. 中国对印度的维持战争。
That's beautiful. It sounds like a song. It's a beautiful language.
And regarding the language thing, of course, I think already many people have said, underlining the importance of the need to know the language if you want to understand the other culture. But to a larger question which the previous questioner had asked, I'll combine the two, and I'll suggest that we have to have, from our side, we have to have a national discourse. If we can have a national discourse in a country like ours, then we should have a national discourse on China. If not national, then let's say there's some kind of a well-defined understanding of what do we expect of China and how do we look at China. I think there is a very well-defined discourse in China vis-a-vis India. I don't know how many of us in India are familiar with that. But keeping that apart, I mean, as Tilak had mentioned, and he had given many examples about China, Japan, and China, India on cultural front. My other point is that, for example, in Indian media, I mean, when in India we report on China, I mean, other than either what is happening at the border or foreign policy, whether China is obstructing our membership to this group or that group in UN or here and there, other than that, we don't see any other reporting on China. I mean, for example, how many of us have seen in our weekly supplements of national dailies a Chinese writer being introduced or a Chinese scholar being introduced? What? I mean, there is nothing happening in the field of culture and literature and scholarship in China. I mean, that if you don't have an organic, complete, holistic, approach, how can you just pick and choose and only try to understand one aspect? How is that possible? In China, they do. In China, they do. She talked about, we don't even bother about teaching the language. And forget about Chinese, any other Asian language we don't. We only offer European languages in our school curriculum and all that. Indian also, in North India, we don't offer other than Hindi anything. In other parts of India, they do still maintain 3-language formula. Anyway, let's leave that aside. What I'm saying is, in China, in many universities, in graduation literature, I have seen Shakuntalam is in the syllabus in Chinese. I mean, one can go on giving examples. There is no end to it. You go to Shanghai, for example. Anybody who gets a chance to go to Shanghai, I'll request them to spare 2 hours or something to go and visit Shanghai Museum. Shanghai Museum has 2 huge pavilions where they keep the ancient artifacts or stone sculptures of the deities or the figures who were stone worshipped, and there are more than 150 figures there. And that is about China's ancient stone worshipping statue. There is not a single one is Chinese, all are Indian. So, I mean, he talked about 3 Idiots, PK. I was tempted to intervene and tell him that many of us, Devashish included, we have seen Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahuti in Chinese on China every night. So forget about Khans. There are Farah Khan's fan clubs, there are Shah Rukh Khan fan clubs. That goes on and on and on. So, I mean, you blame it colonialism, you blame it nation state, you can find whom to blame. But the fact is that we have become the other for each other.
Yeah, just to respond to all of you, Tilak, I think I'm a little confused. I mean, we are not talking about India-China relations. We are talking of India-China media relations. And to understand India-China media relations, we need to understand the dynamics of media. Media doesn't work the way we are thinking. Media is not about Shanghai Museum. Media is not about PK. Media is not about, we are not talking about media. The nature of the beast is such. For example, that's why I'm saying there has been an anomaly. We cover South Asia and Southeast Asia from the point of disaster and crisis. That needs to stop. But even if that stops, there are no foreign desks, any of the media organizations any longer. We covered Sri Lanka till the time LTTE was there. We would cover Pakistan till the time there is a global terror threat, etc., in Pakistan. Otherwise, it's not going to be covered. So let's not have this utopian belief that we are going to cover our neighbors. We do not cover our country. I said 95% of India is not covered. You're talking about language, ma'am. How many languages do we know in our country? 60% of English language, viewers or readers are from the south of India, whereas 95% of Indian media coverage is concentrated on north and particularly Delhi. We do not even cover the south of the country, which actually is the viewership. So even the market doesn't control the media. So the nature of the beast of media is a completely different organism. We do not, even if culture, features, human interest stories, they do not operate all together. When we talk about development stories, I mean, development journalism is a term that was given by West to developing countries. So when the Western person came to a developing country to do journalism, they call it development journalism. For us, journalism is journalism, irrespective. And when you see journalism and journalism, then obviously you prioritize. So if the river issue, or if the water wars, because the next war that the world is going to fight is going to be water wars. China controls 11 countries with its rivers. That is more important to understand China from the perspective of international relations rather than a museum. It would be wonderful to talk about the museum if there was space, but I'm saying is that do we even talk about museums inside India? Then go to China. So I just want to put this on record that I don't think so there is even the space for that kind of a coverage or that kind of a narrative inside the media houses.
If I'm allowed to just make one brief intervention, I mean, I respect Mr. Bhattacharya's opinion, but I beg to differ with him. Simply because, of course, one can go on debating, but I'm saying that if there are certain media houses in India who have sent their reporters and correspondents in China, then we expect that their job is to feed us about China, not just only limited this, that, or something else. So, I mean, I beg to differ.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have one other hand up.
I want to intervene once again. This space, whether the space is there or not, that is our crisis also. We are actually what we are, the question raised. We are actually China wala. We don't have space. In example, this is, in a seminar, chair all of a sudden identified me and asked me, there was a confusion regarding one word. Somebody is discussing about trust and what is in Chinese. And so the moment I started giving meaning, explaining the meaning in Chinese and what is the term, and then one genuine professor from School of International Studies told me that I don't care what China wala is saying. So we are actually China wala. We don't have any space. We are marginalized. Not only in media, that is, see, when we are talking about India-China relations, media relations, this is a India-China relations also. So we have to think about that. And this is, when you are talking about space, I am talking about, I don't actually have any space. Nobody is giving me space. I am a China wala. Thank you.
Well, I see that, did you have one final? This is going to be the final comment then, because our time is up. So please.
I guess the thing that got me thinking is in this media relations, India-China relation is, if you look at China as a one-party state, Vietnam, Laos, they need to shape the media discourse. And what I get away today is, China would like to shape the media discourse in India, but it's unable to do so because of the way the media is structured. It's different from China. And I think it's looking for opportunities to see how it can sort of boost its image or shape the discourse on different types of issues. That's my feeling, at least based on my observation about how it has tried to shape the media in Southeast Asia. I'll give you an example. Last week when I attended a meeting at the Foreign Correspondents Club in Thailand, the Thai government, under the new king and the military government, has introduced the Thai media bill. And it's all about trying to control the media. And all media, whether Thai media, local media, and foreign media. But as the discussion got heated up, everybody turned around and looked, where is the Chinese media? Mayoran. There were 5 Chinese newspapers, well known, operating in Thailand. They were all business papers. They only report on business news. But they weren't part of that media discourse there. So I think
for me, I leave today, and I think these are questions that we can also think about for all of us in, wanting to facilitate relationships. You have two different beasts, two different media structure, and I think there is that challenge, the search on how to shape the discourse. And I think the formula is still not right there, and while, infotainment may be pleasing, accessible, I think it's a tool that can be explored, but will your bureaucrats, your policymaker, support that vulgar medium? I'm not sure. So that's my just comment. I don't have any answer, but we can talk during the coffee break. Thank you very much.
Okay, I would like to thank everyone, certainly our distinguished guest speakers, and also for the very interested audience who's here, audience participants. I think we covered some of the territory we set out to cover. I think we left, certainly from my perspective, a lot of questions dangling. I feel that while we defined what the media was, what the limitations are, I think we didn't bring fully into the meaning of what the new media means in this world. I think we kind of skirted, we're afraid to cover it because we really don't know where it's going and what it's doing. Contextualizing media, I think, could merit its very own conference, putting media in context, and then not ignoring that youth population that's going to overwhelm all of us. And they're really going to, hopefully, be able to determine a lot about the future. So thank you all very much, and we will see you. We have our JGU tradition, which we cannot break with. So please bear with us and applaud all these wonderful speakers.